So thank you all so much for joining. My name is Catherine Reichman-Sigworth. I am the Kettering Curator of Photography and Special Projects here at the Dayton Art Institute. And I am so happy to be joined today by Dorna Thordy, whose solo exhibition, Archiving Eden, is on view at the museum through January 10th, 2010. Or 2010, woo, 2021. As many of you know, the museum is currently open with limited hours, and we are following all COVID-19 health precautions. If you have any questions, please visit our website at daytonartinstitute.org. Please also consider joining me again next month for the museum's book club, The Language of Art, as we discuss the recently published book, Feasting Wild, In Search of the Last Untamed Food by environmental anthropologist Gina Ray LaCerva. The book is on view in the museum store, and they would love to see you. Also, as one of the major themes of this exhibition is the concept of food security. The museum is hosting a food drive starting tomorrow, which will benefit the Dayton Food Bank. This will run through December 20th, and we are offering a $1 discount to regular admission prices for anyone who'd like to participate. I hope you can all donate something to make sure that this event is a success. I also want to take a moment to thank our sponsors for this exhibition, including patron sponsor PhotoFocus, who had to cancel their photography biennial this year, but remained committed to its participating venues, and we are deeply grateful. We have supporting sponsorship from Martha and Mark Shaker and PNC, as well as in memory of Sejona M. Weaver. Additional support comes from Jeff and Susie McCudis, Norma Landis and Rick Hoffman, and Premier Health. And lastly, I want to make sure to thank all of the members on this call. As many of you know, the museum relies heavily on admission and membership for its revenue, and last year membership accounted for 16% of 29's revenue. That's a significant amount, and we are greatly appreciative for those of you who continue to support us. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dorna Thordy, who, when I mentioned this event to a mutual colleague, said she is one of those rare people who is both kind and brilliant, and I could not agree more. Doherty is an American artist whose work is concerned with human entanglement in the rapidly changing environment. A 2012 Guggenheim Fellow, Doherty has received grants from the Fulbright Foundation, the Japan Foundation, and the United States Department of the Interior. Working primarily in photography, video, and scientific imaging, Doherty's work is in numerous permanent collections and has been featured in exhibitions and publications widely in the US and abroad. A monograph of her project, Archiving Eden, was published in 2018 and once again is on view in our lovely museum store. Archiving Eden is an ongoing photographic series in which Doherty has explored the ecological, scientific, and philosophical implications of seed banks. Since 2008, she has visited 18 seed banks and botanical research centers on 5 continents. She is the Distinguished Research Professor at the University of North Texas, and I'm so pleased to have her here today. Hi, Dorna.
Hey, Katie. Well, thank you for that lovely introduction and for calling me both kind and brilliant. That's really sweet. So thank you.
Well, it's absolutely true. And we really are so happy to have you here. And, you know, you're one of those great people to work with. And so you and I have known each other since maybe 2011.
Oh, wow.
I know. It was kind of trying to count back. It was surprising to realize it's been that long. And so I kind of wanted to start this conversation by first showing everyone an image that's what brought us together. So let's see here. So this photograph is was acquired by the Amon Carter in 2011, which is where I worked and met you, which is located in Fort Worth, Texas. This is part of a different series than what we have on view at the museum right now, and it's part of your series Agua Quemada, Burnt Water. For those of you looking at this image, what Dornith has done is she has gone to the Rio Grande and she photographed at various locations. She then collected objects on this trip, both natural elements and detritus, created an assemblage in her studio, then projected that photo onto the assemblage, and then took this final image. So within this, you can really see it based on the texture and the horizon line of blue jeans, and then the stitch work of a cowboy boot in the river. So while this has a really different feel than what people will see at the Dayton Art Institute, I wanted to start with this because there's a lot of similarities in this project too. And it's all about your interests in landscape, but also this very layered approach to it. And the idea that landscape is not a sterile vista, but full of all of these culturally imbued implications. So I was hoping you might first tell us kind of what your practice is like and how you evolved from this image to archiving Eden.
Well, I will try not to just nanner on and on. It's a kind of a long story, but I do have this very huge and deep interest in our notions of how we might steward the environment, or how we see ourselves as caretakers of the environment. So the Rio Grande project had come out of actually the Japan Foundation project, where I had been looking at a series of gardens in Kyoto that had a really long-standing relationship with humans. Some of them are 2,000 years old. And with that, and with nature preserves and national parks, I was looking at those as kind of the notion of a macro garden, where people don't necessarily inhabit there anymore, they visit. And that led me to wanting to look at a more complicated view of the landscape, where humans actually had this long history that was in the other projects, but also they were more present. And so I followed the Rio Grande from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up to the headwaters in Colorado and took photographs along, just like you described. But part of that was to kind of show the history and the shared culture. I mean, the Rio Grande it has a super long history, of course, and is very important to the United States in terms of water rights, and it's contested between the US and Mexico. The water rights are contested between people inside the United States, but also externally. And of course, with the Native Americans who live along that river and still do. So I wanted to talk about it as both a place where people come together, but where also they separate over the history of it. So in that picture, there's the blue jeans and the cowboy boots, which of course are a shared cultural heritage between both Mexico and, northern Mexico and the southwest United States. We wear the same clothing, and actually there's also cornmeal masa, which is what tortillas are made out of, and we share that food as well. So that's kind of what led me to really look at that project as a way of kind of recording the invisible, of the history and the culture of that landscape that's so important to us. So, and then while I was working on that project, I actually started the next project, which was Archiving Eden. I tend to work because Archiving Eden requires so much fundraising to travel around the world. I mean, it's been 5 continents. So every time I have to kind of pause and collect resources to move forward on the project. So, so that one was, I usually have like a local project, local meaning, an hour flight, as opposed to 2 days to get to the North Pole.
Yeah, or in the case of that particular photo, which I did go find that location when I went and traveled in Big Bend. That's about, what, a 9-hour drive from where you live?
Yeah, absolutely, right? And then you have to climb up onto that hillside to look down, right? You know, it's
It was not nearly as pretty when I went there. It was this parting of marshes to and finally finding that bend in the river. But
I,
so with that, so you had the local and then the global, but do you see these as really separate projects, or what themes do you see running through both of them?
well, for me, uh, that notion of protected landscape or living and the tension with how our actions affect the environment and how the environment affects us. You know, climate change, we're increasingly entangled in it, right? We're responsible for its mercurial character, the changing severity of the storms, but then also we're profoundly affected by it, you know, and from the landscape to our food source.
So let's see, why don't I now just share with everyone a picture that kind of serves as the beginning of your project. Um, let's see, there we go. So this is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, which do not try to say 5 times fast. Um, this is kind of the impetus of your project, and this Global Seed Vault, which is located in the Arctic Circle. It opened in 2008, the same year that this ongoing series began. It's not the first location you visited, but it's very important, and, pun intended, the construction of this is what planted the seed for the project. So, as I'm unsure if everyone in this group has heard of Svalbard or maybe even the concept of seed banks, would you be able to kind of explain what this place is, what it means for your project, and then what it was like to gain access?
Um, and if I skip one of your 3 questions, just remind me.
I'll keep you honest.
Thank you. So I read, someone had corrected me that the article I read was actually written in 2007 about the pending opening. But I think that it sat on my night table until 2008, because I remember it being 2008 when I read this article in the New Yorker about the opening of the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. And at that point, I didn't know what a seed vault was or a seed bank was. And except for, a farmer or an agricultural seed bank where you store seeds from one season to the next. And I read that this article that talked about basically a Noah's Ark for plant life being built on an island only 600 miles from the North Pole. And I was astonished, the profoundly dystopian and utopian narratives that are kind of interwoven in that project. And the fact that it took one person 35 years to do it was just amazing to me. And I immediately said, well, I want to photograph that. And, all my friends were like, there's not a project there, right? It's really, there's nothing there, Dorna. And I was super hard-headed about it because there were like a bunch of picture labs, nobody will care. And I was like, no, really, it's just the most amazing thing that, the gravity of climate change and political instability has created a need for a remote and inaccessible doomsday vault at the North Pole. Like, who wouldn't want to see that? And I also liked the narrative of hope that's interwoven in that. That somebody finally, I kind of feel like I doom scroll all the time about climate change, and that there's nothing that an individual person can do. And yet, here somebody got a collection of scientists and institutions from all over the world to collaborate to build this project that requires collaboration between multiple countries. It was just, that somebody was trying to save it was amazing to me and really powerful. So that's really what inspired it. And then what were your other 2 questions?
So, well, and I like that you mentioned this dichotomy of the dystopian and utopian views. Um, so, and maybe I was getting ahead of myself with those other questions. Maybe it is why did you decide to call this project Archiving Eden? What does that, because that term is kind of has a duality in a multitude of places. The scientific term of archive, the more philosophical, biblical term of Eden, which in itself is both a utopian and simultaneously we think of our fall from paradise.
Our
So what?
expulsion. Yeah.
Yeah, our expulsion. So for you, what were you hoping that this project would embody? It sounds like it's not an either or. It is not simply looking at Svalbard as the doomsday vault, which even Kerry Fowler, the man who finally made this happen, I think almost every single one of his articles, he titles it the doomsday vault. So he gets the cachet of it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, for me, it was the title comes from not necessarily, like I was thinking about it, not from necessarily a Christian point of view, but the idea of Eden as the primary garden and, the narrative of being, thrown out of it. So, of course, which ties into a lot of the narratives of climate change. So for me to kind of get at a title that would talk about these, the scientific, the spiritual, the human aspect and the philosophical aspect about the choices that we are making, like in some ways, seed banks are very much about choice because it's what seeds people choose to save. They're not saving all of the seeds. They're not preserving 100% of the biodiversity of the world. They're making choices. And many times those choices are tied into a human narrative about what would be important or not.
Yeah. So with Svalbard, it's specifically meant as kind of the backup vault for all of the world's pre-existing vaults,
Mm-hmm.
which it kind of realized its goal in 2015 when a gene vault in Aleppo was damaged by the Syrian civil war. And so they had to re-release, I believe it was wheat grains to help guarantee the future of that. And that's obviously very specific because that is what keeps us alive. It's a major food source.
Right.
So even though not all of these vaults specialize in food sources, that does seem to be kind of a common thread. It's saving biodiversity in order to save ourselves.
Yeah, and it's kind of economic botany in some ways. So it's also, they're saving things like lumber, so it's food, but it's also very human centric. And the attitude about what is saved at different banks varies. So the Svalbard vault is currently the most comprehensive vault in the world, but it reflects the collecting policies of the different countries. And then they maintain their collections over time. So that's how it kind of works, is that it's together but still separate. And the Aleppo story, they were not anticipating that. And it was not climate change. It was political instability that created the need. And the scientists couldn't get into it. And that story repeats again and again over the history of seed banking. I mean, even the first really major one, I think we have a picture of it that
yeah, let's see here. I can show that real quick. Maybe I can. Here we go.
Yeah. So that one that actually has a portrait of Nikolai Vavilov on the left is in St. Petersburg. And during World War II, Hitler barricaded the city, and there was a huge famine, and 600,000 citizens died. And the scientists that were there, it was like the Svalbard vault. At the time, it was the most comprehensive. And they knew he had gone on like 100 expeditions around the world to collect seeds from the whole world. His goal was to prevent famine from ever happening again. And so he was really trying to had this very, very big goal of saving people from starvation. And then, ironically, the scientists, they couldn't evacuate the seed bank because it was already too late. They had evacuated the artwork from the Hermitage Museum, but they weren't able to evacuate the seed vault, even though they tried to sneak it out of the city. So they had to barricade the doors, and then the scientists died of starvation inside the bank.
Well, yeah, while surrounded by
Right. Yeah, and they saw it as, that like once they lost that biodiversity, they couldn't recapture it. So
absolutely.
the long-term survivability of the plants under their care was more important to them. But it's interesting, and that's not the only, I mean, that's a very dramatic story, but it's not, that kind of sacrifice and acknowledgement of the importance of preserving biodiversity, it infuses all the stories of the seed banks around the world.
So what was it like gaining access to all these locations? And as I imagine there'll be questions about what equipment you used. Were there any difficulties of what you could bring, especially with Svalbard? It just looks freezing. Were there issues of equipment malfunctioning both inside and outside these banks? Because they're all very cold to keep the seeds in kind of a suspended animation.
Absolutely. And so I have a great story about Svalbard. So I had to do a lot of research to figure out what to take with me to Svalbard, because it really is, you have to fly for 2 days to get there. And I wanted to take I'd been using the view camera, and I had a couple of friends who were photographers, my colleagues at the University of North Texas, and they said, you cannot go to the North Pole with just a view camera. You can't take 4x5 film and not take a digital DSLR backup. You must take it. So I said, okay. And I had a little pocket camera. So I took everything to the North Pole, and had to figure out like the batteries and keeping myself warm. I was wearing all the clothes I owned. So I get there and I'm photographing, and the view camera, because it's dim and very cold, but it's mechanical, so it doesn't freeze. And it was maybe 15-minute exposures. And so I was going around with a digital DSLR during these longer exposures and taking other photographs. And then, of course, the thing that froze was the DSLR. But, so it would get to a certain point, it would freeze, and there was no coming back. It had to go home and take a nap. And then the next day, it could come back. But it was not, so that was the ironic part. And the other thing is that photograph you showed at the first, I had climbed up behind the vault on this ice mountain because it was March, and it was super slick. And I was standing there with my view camera and a tripod, and a polar gust picked me up and threw me down that mountainside. And so I'm sliding and clattering, and the view camera's I'm holding onto the view camera, and we're just sliding down. And we land at the feet, of course, of the only other photographer who was there at the time, which was a National Geographic photographer who was just laughing at me. But because it was a mechanical device, I picked it up and shook it off, and it was fine. And so I could continue.
Was that in mid-exposure by chance?
No, it was not. It was just, I was like, I don't know what I was doing. When all I remember was just being knocked down and just sliding the whole way down. It was hilarious. So I hope I answered your question, right? What is it?
Yeah. So I kind of wanted to let people know that you were using both a viewfinder and a digital camera. And most of the images in the show, the final object are inkjet prints.
Right.
Is that correct?
And then once I earned the support of the Guggenheim Foundation, I did switch away from the view camera, which takes 4x5-inch negatives. And part of that was because of the flight over to Svalbard, I had X-ray damage, because I kept having to go through X-rays on the way there and on the way back. So I switched to a digital stitching back so that these prints can be they can be 20 foot tall and still be at perfect resolution, super, super sharp. So a couple of the pictures, the Svalbard vault, and I'm sorry, not the Svalbard vault, but the Kuban vault is made in that way.
Okay.
So they're stitched together. And the Bartley collection that we just looked at is stitched together from 9 digital files so that you can read every label and every number on all the information in the pictures when you look at them closely.
And I do highly recommend for those able to visit to really spend some time, because one of the things I love, especially about the vault images, is that first, it really feels like it's just that archiving part of the title. They have this very scientific, sterile, mundane thing to them. But the more time you spend with them, the more details that reveal themselves. It's really quite incredible how much is captured in that image. And then you get that idea that these are sites of just brimming with hope, brimming with biodiversity. You know, like you said, a technological garden is just waiting to explode in these spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And since you mentioned it, I'm going to share my screen again to show guests some X-rays images. And if you could kind of explain what are these? What am I looking at?
So what these are is right at the very beginning when I started this project and I was going into these kind of sterile labs and I was seeing all these seeds. I wanted to get at the metaphoric quality. You know, there's so much of this that's invisible, right? The span of time, and you have these scale shifts from the tiny seeds to global climate change, that I really wanted a way to kind of get at that more metaphoric quality. So these are actual X-rays that have, on the left is the X-ray of a poppy seed head that is spilling the poppy seeds out. So they're X-rays of individual plants and seeds that have, oh, that's my dogs. I'm sorry. I have someone coming to the door always. It's inevitable, right?
It is.
And then on the right-hand side is a collage of seed heads again that are from Banksias, which are an Australian plant. And in Ohio, it's probably, they've been imported to the U.S. You encounter them in the U.S., the southern part of the U.S. They're bottle brush plants.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so those are the seed heads of a bottle brush plant.
And so with these photographs, you know, I think the poppy, the black and white image is something that most of us would expect when seeing an X-ray image. But the Banksia is very unique looking. So in that case, you've flipped the hues and you've selected blue as kind of the toning. Why choose that? What is the aesthetic goal that you're trying to reach?
Well, for me, it's really a meaning. It's about a couple of different layers of meaning there for me. One is, of course, is a reference to the cryogenic preservation process. So you encounter blue as a metaphor for cold in a lot of these, but also as I traveled and I encountered these seed banks in all these really super remote places, I started thinking about the global exchange of plants and animals and disease agents that started right at the Columbian Exchange in the late, in 1493, the East met West. And you see that there's a kind of explosion of cross-cultural exchange in terms of Delft pottery with Chinese pottery with Talavera, that they were using that blue and white pottery as a way of talking about this kind of global exchange of plants and ideas. And I was encountering that with the seed banks where they were, participating in this super widespread network, sending plants back and forth and exchanging ideas through conferences. So for me, it means like global exchange, but also cold.
Yeah, and with the X-rays, and I just saw a question come in that is a good one. Mm-hmm. So what you've done is you're collaborating with the scientists on site to use their X-ray equipment, which is normally used for seed viability tests.
That's right. And I was very fortunate to have them. I see that the question asked if I was actually making the X-rays. And the answer to that is yes. And so I just, at the U.S. National Bank, I started working there in when I was photographing the U.S. Bank, I encountered the first X-ray machine that they were using. And I saw the possibility of this notion of being able to peer inside these tiny sparks of life, that how cool that would be to be able to make images of that. And over time, my collaboration kind of deepened and extended so that I was able, my first question was, can I use this machine? And they said yes. And then I was like, well, can I use this machine on these seeds that you're using for research? They get damaged when you X-ray them, so they're just for study. I'm not doing the ones that are actually kept for viability. And then later I saw the tissue samples, and which are plants grown either from seed or from clones that they studied. And I was like, can I X-ray that? And they were like, well, we don't usually do that, but sure. And then they got interested because they were like, oh, we haven't thought about doing this. Can you see this? And I, use my photographic knowledge to adjust the controls on the machine to see what we could see that they were trying to see. So it was a really fun, mutually interesting collaboration where we ended up with unintended and unanticipated kind of results. That was super, super fun.
Well, that brings up a good point. One of the things that I like about your projects is they're very scientific focused. You're exploring these things. You're very, it's full of questions. You're not just photographing for the sake of photographing. Mm-hmm. So in your work, how do you see that, intersection of science with the visual arts?
That's such an interesting question, right? Because I do think that the scientific accuracy of the imagery as the baseline is important to the artwork. But it's really about the metaphor that's embodied in the final image and the meaning there that I'm interested in. But and it's interesting because even though the X-ray pictures are super poetic, they still have that same sharpness that the view camera images do. Like, with the camera, the documentary part of it, they're super sharp and they're super descriptive. And the X-rays are too, but then they have this other layer of the more open-ended, people can bring their own experiences and interpretations to amplify some of the questions that I have about extending life in these tiny, vulnerable plants.
Yeah, and I know, I'm so glad it's your pets, by the way. I've been terrified. I've been terrified it was going to be my cat who just jumped up here and took over.
Yeah. Well, and there's two guys walking up to the door, so it's there you go.
Right on cue. Right on cue.
We're going to power through that, right?
Absolutely. Well, and so speaking of this metaphoric quality and all these different references, these are two of my favorite X-rays of this section of your project.
Well, thank you.
On first glance, finite, it just seems celestial. And then as you get closer, you realize these very incredible, minute details of the seeds and kind of the frass. And then I also love Columbian Exchange, which, as you mentioned earlier, it's referencing this idea of how the world changed both intentionally and unintentionally when Christopher Columbus came over to the Americas and global trade became a whole new thing. And it's very, it's this beautiful bouquet, but it's also very significant to you in your home state of Texas.
Yeah, and I was thinking, it was at the same part where I was really thinking about that global exchange and the opening, and the one on the left is almost like it references old-fashioned 19th century botanical prints that somebody would do from a botanical expedition, but it also looks like a bouquet, and it's kind of a portrait of Texas. So it has pecans and it has mesquite, and then the grass-like objects that are in there are actually the cousin or the ancestor of corn. And then the leaves on the upper left are eucalyptus, which of course have been traded and are now present. You know, they came over from Australia and now they're here in Texas. So that kind of notion of the exchange for me was it, but also creating a portrait of something that was unique to Texas, I thought was really important. And you know, the one on the right is it's a really big print. It's 60 by 60 inches. And so one of the reasons that one is so big is that the story that was told to me, I like the fact that it flips between, you don't know if you're looking through a microscope or a telescope. It has that sense where maybe those are stars, or maybe they're seeds, or maybe they're even biological agents. So I really love that. But the plant that seed comes from, I was told only exists on a place on the planet that's about 2 meters by 2 meters. And they found it in Australia. So there's a reference to the Southern Cross in those pictures, which is the Australian, you know, it's a constellation over Australia. But those are only they were found in a mining expedition where they have to do a botanical survey before they start mining in Western Australia. And that plant only exists on the planet on a space that is about the size of that 60-inch print.
Wow, that is incredible. I didn't realize that was so rare to that.
Yeah.
And as I see our time is getting a little shorter, I do want to at least mention these lenticular panels, which when I was describing this show before we brought it, was the thing I kept nerding out with my colleagues about. So for those of you who haven't seen, and you should be able to kind of see like a motion of color shifting here, and that references what happens when you actually stand in front of these lenticular panels, which are multi-angled surfaces where you've created a digital collage behind, so at different angles your eye registers different aspects of the composition. What did this bring to your project that you thought was needed?
Well, you know, it's interesting. And whenever I see these kind of representations of these prints, I'm always disappointed, because when you see them in person, you walk up to them and they're a still print, and you're walking, and then all of a sudden you start noticing that the color's changing. And the magic of that moment where you're like, wait a second, did I just see that? What am I seeing? Yeah. And it changes from green to blue, which for me, I wanted a way to talk about this quest to preserve this, you know, to stop time. And that no matter what we do, we cannot really stop time. They're trying to extend the life of these plants and seeds to go for 200 years, but you can't really stop. You know, and they continue to change, albeit slowly. So that notion of changing from green to blue references, for me, the cryogenic process. And there's also some that I've made that go from green to brown that talks about drying. So I was thinking about the ways that time interplays with the seed banks themselves, that an exploration of how to express that. You want stillness, but it keeps changing. You want stop time, but the time keeps moving. So that line between stillness and change is what I was really after with those.
Well, and like you said, I love, because it's about your interaction and it shifts back and forth. Not only is it about the cryogenics, but it's about that spark of life moment as well, as it shifts back to the green. Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned earlier, you referenced with Columbian Exchange, and with all of these, there's this reference to kind of 19th century botanical illustrations. Mm-hmm. I know that when I first see these images, I immediately think of Anna Atkins, mm-hmm. who created, you know, the very first photographic book, which was all cyanotypes of British algae. Do you see your work as kind of in that same lineage, or do you see yourself outside of that?
Oh, I think there is you know, it's funny because references to her come up quite often. And if you look at those the seedling cabinets, those reference for me the cabinets of curiosity that Alfred Wallace, I'm screwing up his name. Yeah, Alfred Wallace did. He was a contemporary of Darwin, and the kind of the way that they would make little cabinets that would fit each object separately. So if you look at those seedling cabinets, they reference not only the seed bank architecture, but also 19th century cabinets and earlier 18th century cabinets of curiosity. So
which is interesting because this whole idea of kind of the natural sciences and amateur sciences kind of evolved and grew at the exact same time that photography was invented. So it's a very interesting melding of the two.
Well, and I think I became aware of 19th century amateur science because of my interest in photography and studying the history of photography. So that part of it is super interesting. And it kind of mimics, like, I'm not a scientist, and yet I have access to these X-ray machines. I'm making work that references science, that people use, you know, in some ways use it to add to the conversation about science. And it's expanded some of the conversation around seed banking. So I think that's kind of interesting, you know?
Yeah. Well, I'm seeing what time it is. So is there any last thing that you want to say about this project before we maybe ask some questions or take some questions?
No, I think we should take questions.
Okay. Let's see. I see a Rob Shook who just moved to Ohio from DFW. Well, welcome. Let's see. Does the DA, we are always working to have more exhibitions, and we do have a photography gallery. You know, as of right now, please just stay tuned to our website and we will keep you posted. We should be announcing the next year's schedule here soon.
Mm-hmm. Well, how fun. Somebody looked up Alfred Russel Wallace and posted a link to a video. Super fun. Yeah, yes. There you go, guys.
That would be a friend in the education department, so it's unsurprising that she was that tech savvy.
So
if there's any questions, I think at this point, if you'd like to unmute yourselves or if you prefer writing in the chats, we're happy to take any questions. You can also turn on your camera if you want to say hello.
And that always takes a minute.
Hi. Who made your lenticular prints?
The lenticular, I started out with a little place in Wisconsin, and it wasn't very good. And so now I use a lab in New York City.
All right.
And they are fantastic.
I hope to see them in person. Thank you.
Well, thanks. Yeah.
And I have another question. You probably don't own them, do you?
No, they're super expensive. They're a couple $100,000. And so that was like part of the amazing part of it, right? That I could ask and they would say yes.
Yeah.
And so I ended up using them in England and in the US Bank and in the British Bank and Australia.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, absolutely, anytime.
So Dornath, in the questions, there's a Morgan Grasham who is curious about what indigenous seed banks and related narratives could offer to your work and how they relate to other seed banks you've worked with.
Well, you know what, Morgan, thank you for that question. And thank you, Philip Koch, for that little comment. But the indigenous seed banks are a really interesting part of this narrative. And in fact, food justice and the ownership of seeds is contested in different parts of the world. The US Bank, you know, partly what I'm doing is I'm not doing smaller banks. I'm doing large national banks around the world. And the Native American community has just contributed to the Svalbard Vault. They contributed ancient family grains, mostly corn. Just recently, it was in the news. And I think it's a really important part of it, and especially the notion of ownership of living life forms, and, or trademarking living life forms that's happening. So I think that's embedded in the seed bank narrative already, if in different ways throughout the thing. But I do think that I'm waiting to go to the Mexico Bank for things to calm down. But I think that that's a really important heritage. And one of the interesting stories I have about that is actually there's an Apache, there is a forest of pecan trees that are completely like isolated population, like lost pines in Texas. If there's anybody from Texas, there's a lost community of pecan trees way up in New Mexico, and they were carried by the Apache and planted there. So that, and the pecan researcher for the U.S. discovered these collection of pecan trees and has been sampling them in order to bring those genes back into the gene bank and part of the pecan trees that are available to everybody. So they're breeding those back into the U.S. pecan tree population.
Well, I see hi Remington. It's good to see you. Let's see, did you notice if the scientists you were partnering with to do this work saw their work differently through the collaboration? Did the sense of meaning of their work grow in any way?
Did you know science were partnering to do this?
So
no, it is interesting that both of the conversations enriched both of our experiences. And and partly it was that they had this sense that their work, that others would not be interested in this super important work that they were doing, that they're working, in these small groups in remote locations, and that to have this kind of celebration of it that came out of people being interested and wanting to tell the stories, I think that was a really powerful thing for them. And hello, Remington, I remember you. So
great to see you and hear you.
Oh my goodness, hello. So great to see you. How funny. Thank you for turning your video camera on. Great to see you.
Good to have some community, huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and we also had Christine Fleming was asking, what is next for you in your creative process?
Oh, I am working right now. I continue to work. I know that we have 4 minutes, so I'll be brief. We have, I have a long-term project this one's still going on, and I've also started working on atmospheric air pollution and the way that we think about the atmospheric ocean that surrounds the planet, and primarily through looking at tiny, tiny dust and micro collisions with that dust as a way of envisioning air pollution. So I have a whole series called Atlas of the Invisible, which is it shares some of the same themes, right? How to make this scale between tiny, tiny dust particles that affect the carbon that is creating problems with climate change, but also, they're tiny, but they affect it at a global scale, and then rendering that visible. So I have a series of photographs that were made with a scanning electron microscope that are at enormous scale. They're 70, they're 6 foot long prints. And one of them, I'm opening a show in Dallas on the November 21st, and it's a 10-foot print of a hummingbird feather encountering dust. So like butterfly wings with dust that they collected, and bird micro collisions. So there's an image that you had, Katie, but probably...
Here, I can quickly show that.
Yeah, and that's working with a different group of scientists, which is the Air Rights Space Materiality group at the University of North Texas. So that's what I'm working on right now. That's my local project while I'm still working on archiving Eden.
So other than the Mexico bank that you mentioned, are there plans for any other banks?
Oh yeah, you know, I was supposed to go. I was supposed to go to Peru when the pandemic hit and go to the potato seed bank there, which is really important to my personal history, is the potato seed bank and potato biodiversity.
Which many people here, well, many millennials might recognize from Zac Efron's show that just released this summer. He just went there.
I know, he totally scooped me. They were talking.
I'm so mad for this talk. I'm like, oh my God, he just stole everything.
No, it was really funny because my collaborator from the U.S. bank had moved to Peru and then retired. And then somebody reached out to me and said, we'd love to have you come. But they evidently also invited Zac Efron. And he got there before me because he didn't have to fundraise. Dang it. Anyway, so funny. I'm still going though.
Good.
It'll be different. So anyway, well, this was awesome, Katie. Thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to show in your beautiful museum. And I hope to come and visit it before it comes down and see it in person. That's what I really want to do. So,
well, we are so thrilled to have this. I think many people here know that as soon as I moved to Dayton, this was a project I wanted to bring. So absolutely thrilled it happened. It's funny how it remains so timely with, you know, the pandemic showing these issues of food supply chains and infrastructure. So for those of you local, I do hope that you have an opportunity to see it. For those of you joining elsewhere, please visit Dornists' website to see the scope of this project. We only have a select few on view. And please come back for more programming. Thank you all so much.
thanks. Bye-bye.